400 years ago, a single company became more valuable than every tech giant on Earth combined. Not Apple, not Microsoft, not Amazon. A quiet Dutch corporation once reached a valuation equivalent to nearly $8 trillion in today's money. So powerful it commanded armies, ruled foreign cities, and bent nations to its will. And here, the unsettling part. Its real weapon wasn't ships or cannons. It was something far more dangerous, a financial system that still controls your world today. Before we go any further, subscribe to Gilded Old Money, because this channel exists to expose the hidden financial architectures, dynasties, and power structures the elite never wanted publicly understood. When most people think about old money, they picture the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, or oil barons behind closed doors. Almost no one looks to a modest republic of merchants fighting for survival against the largest empire on Earth. Yet it was here, out of desperation, that the modern world was quietly rewritten. In the late 1500s, Spain absorbed Portugal and instantly controlled the oceans, the trade routes, and the wealth of 3 continents. The Dutch Republic stood no chance in a traditional war. They lacked the gold, the manpower, and the crown. So instead of building a bigger army, they invented something unprecedented. They weaponized capital itself. In 1602, 7 competing trading firms were fused into a single entity, not owned by a king, not funded by taxes, but powered by private money. On paper, it looked like a trading company. In reality, it was the first machine ever built to turn markets into empire. For the first time in history, ordinary citizens were invited to finance global conquest and profit from it. Shares replaced swords, dividends replaced tribute, risk was outsourced to the public, while control remained concentrated at the top. This wasn't just capitalism. This was economic warfare disguised as investment. Ships sailed under corporate flag. Soldiers fought for a board of directors. Fortresses were built not for a crown, but for shareholders. And as money poured in, something irreversible happened. Power detached itself from land, bloodlines, and divine right, and reattached itself to financial systems. But corporations don't rise alone. Watching closely from the shadows was a fragile noble house with no throne, no empire, and no army strong enough to survive the new world forming around them. Their old titles meant nothing in a republic ruled by merchants. Their enemies wanted them erased. Their allies wanted them sidelined. They faced a brutal choice: fade into irrelevance, or tie their fate to the most powerful financial engine ever created. So they did something radical. They abandoned feudal power and hitched their dynasty to the market. This alliance would quietly transform a merchant company into a sovereign force and elevate a struggling noble family into one of the most enduring power centers in Western history. But here's the question that should stop you cold. If this 400-year-old financial weapon reshaped empires once, is it still shaping yours today? Long before stock tickers, before central banks, before paper money itself, civilizations learned a brutal lesson. Empires don't collapse when they lose wars, they collapse when their money breaks. Ancient Rome didn't fall in a single invasion. It rotted slowly as silver coins were quietly diluted, trust eroded, and soldiers were paid in promises instead of value. What began as a powerful currency became a hollow symbol until the empire could no longer sustain itself. Sound familiar? In imperial China, dynasties rose and fell not by the sword alone, but through reckless currency experiments, overissued paper money, broken guarantees, and financial systems stretched beyond reality. Each collapse followed the same invisible pattern: confidence vanished before power did. The pattern never changes. Only the technology does. By the early 1600s, Europe stood at the edge of this same historical fault line. Spain controlled oceans of silver flowing from the Americas. On the surface, it looked invincible, but beneath the shine, the empire was drowning in debt, inflation, and military overreach. Its money was loud, heavy, and inefficient. The Dutch saw something others didn't. You didn't need more gold to rule the world. You needed belief, liquidity, and structure. While old empires hoarded metal, the Dutch East India Company engineered something radically different. They didn't rely on treasure fleets. They created permanent capital, money that never had to be repaid, only trusted. Shares didn't expire. Ownership could change hands endlessly. Risk was fragmented. Scale became infinite. This wasn't just a business innovation. It was a currency evolution. Where Rome debased coins, the Dutch abstracted value. Where monarchs taxed their people into revolt, the VOC invited them to invest voluntarily. Where ancient states collapsed under the weight of their own money, the Dutch built a system that expanded under pressure. And here's the unsettling parallel. Every dominant power in history believed its system was different until it was. The Roman denarius, the Spanish silver real, the Chinese gyrosi. Each one worked until scale broke it. The VOC's financial architecture didn't collapse immediately. In fact, it outlived empires. Its mechanisms spread, quietly copied by rivals, embedded into banks, exchanges, and governments across Europe. What once financed spice ships would later finance wars, nations, and eventually global markets. But history leaves clues, not guarantees. Every financial revolution eventually faces the same test. Can trust survive when scale becomes absolute? And that leads to the question no one in power once asked. If the Dutch East India Company solved the failures of ancient money, what happens when its own system reaches the breaking point? Systems don't build themselves. Behind every financial revolution, there is always a small group that understands it first and positions itself accordingly. The Dutch East India Company appeared to be a triumph of free markets and shared prosperity, public ownership, open investment, collective risk, but beneath that democratic surface sat a far tighter circle of influence, families who didn't just buy shares but shaped the rules of the game. At the center of that circle stood the House of Orange-Nassau. They didn't manage ships. They didn't negotiate spice contracts. They didn't sit on trading floors. They did something far more effective. They legitimized the system. In a republic ruled by merchants, political stability was fragile. The VOC needed more than money. It needed continuity, protection, and authority. The House of Orange provided exactly that. Their backing reassured investors, unified rival merchant factions, and gave the company a symbolic sovereign shield without turning it into a monarchy. This was power without a crown. As the VOC expanded across Asia, the House of Orange quietly expanded at home. Their influence flowed through appointments, military protection, and legal charters. Over time, their role became formalized. Descendants of the House of Orange rose to the position of stadtholder, effectively presidents of the Republic, and eventually presided over both the East and West India Companies. This meant something extraordinary. A single family now sat at the intersection of state power, corporate power, and financial power, without publicly ruling any of them. While kings fought wars to protect treasuries, the Orange dynasty let markets do the work for them. Dividends replaced tribute, balance sheets replaced borders, and loyalty shifted from flags to profitability. This model was so effective that it didn't stay Dutch. When William of Orange crossed the English Channel in 1688, he didn't just bring soldiers. He brought a financial operating system, one that fused government credibility with private capital, one that funded wars through markets instead of confiscation, one that allowed debt to become an asset rather than a weakness. England adopted it almost overnight. The Bank of England, government bonds, permanent public credit. These weren't British inventions. They were Dutch strategies exported through dynastic influence. And from there, the model spread again, into the colonies, into New Amsterdam, into what would later become New York. The city didn't inherit Dutch language or flags, but it inherited Dutch finance, contracts, credit, markets, trust enforced by institutions, not bloodlines. This is how power really migrates. Not through conquest alone, but through systems that others depend on. And that raises an uncomfortable realization. If a single family once helped shape global finance without ever openly ruling it, who plays that role today, and how much influence do they hold without your consent? Every financial system looks strongest right before it's tested. At its peak, the Dutch East India Company wasn't just successful, it was untouchable. Its revenues rivaled nations. Its private army enforced trade routes. Its monopoly felt permanent, but beneath the surface, the very mechanisms that fueled its rise were quietly turning against it. Scale became friction. Control became complacency. Complexity became blindness. The VOC was built for expansion, not restraint. As profits rolled in, oversight weakened, executives grew distant from reality on the ground, corruption seeped into far-flung outposts, military costs exploded, competition intensified, and the market, once obedient, began to question the story it had been sold. The same system that made capital infinite also made failure systemic. When losses mounted, they couldn't be hidden forever. Dividends stalled, confidence cracked. The shares that once inspired envy became symbols of stagnation. Eventually, the Dutch state had no choice but to intervene. What had been the world's most powerful corporation was absorbed, dismantled, and quietly erased from the future it helped create. Here's the part most people miss. The company collapsed. The system survived. Permanent shares. Limited liability. Public markets. Centralized financial power backed by state credibility. These ideas didn't die with the VOC. They were refined, scaled, and embedded deeper into the global economy than ever before. Now fast forward to today. Markets are larger than nations. Corporations wield influence once reserved for empires. Governments fund themselves through debt sold to the public. Risk is abstracted, bundled, delayed, and redistributed until no one knows where it truly lives. Just like before. Once again, trust is the keystone. Once again, scale is unprecedented. And once again, a small group understands the machinery far better than the public financing it. History doesn't repeat word for word, but it rhymes with precision. So here's the question that defines our moment. If the VOC collapsed when confidence finally met reality, are we standing at a similar tipping point today, or has the system become too big to ever fall? The Dutch East India Company is often remembered as a relic, a footnote in history books, a cautionary tale of corruption and collapse, but that framing misses the real truth. The VOC didn't fail because its ideas were wrong. It failed because its ideas worked too well. It proved that power no longer needed a crown, that empires could be financed, not conquered, that loyalty could be purchased through returns, not oaths. And most importantly, it proved that once capital is abstracted, scaled, and protected by the state, it becomes almost immortal. When the VOC disappeared, its architecture didn't. It simply changed names. Today's multinational corporations, global stock exchanges, permanent public debt, central banks underwriting confidence. These are not modern inventions. They are refinements of a 400-year-old experiment that began in the canals of Amsterdam and quietly spread across the world. Even the House of Orange remains, no longer commanding fleets, but embedded in networks of corporate governance, strategic industries, and financial legitimacy. The crown became ceremonial, the influence did not. And that leads to the final, uncomfortable realization. You are not living in a new financial era. You are living in the mature stage of an old one. A system designed to concentrate risk at the bottom, control at the top, and belief everywhere in between. A system that has survived empires, revolutions, and collapses by adapting just enough to remain unquestioned. So the real question is whether the Dutch East India Company still exists. It's this. If the world's most powerful financial system was designed centuries ago by elites who understood human behavior better than history admits, are you participating in it or being used by it?